Hey guys, Jake Steele, Iron and Steel. This is podcast episode number 10, and this is probably also attempt number 10 at recording this stupid fucking intro, and they've all sucked up to this point, and I've deleted all of the rest of them, and so basically however this take plays out is what you're gonna get. And how's that for a dose of candor? A little behind the scenes for you. In all seriousness, I have to start this episode off like I did the last one and the one before by saying, holy shit, thank you so much for all of the messages, private messages and emails that I've received from people, random people, just saying how much they enjoy the podcast and enjoy the content. Totally unexpected and completely just blown away by the sheer volume of messages like that I've received. So very unexpected, very much appreciated. And the only thing I will say aside from that is if you're truly enjoying the content as much as I'm hearing and as much as you're saying that you are, please don't just tell me, tell your friends, tell your family, coworkers, share it on social media, do all that bullshit that everybody always begs you to do. And if you could, that would be wildly helpful to me. So, but again, thank you so much for the messages. A little overwhelming, but very much appreciated. So for this episode, I'm going to read a story off of ironandsteel.com that's called Hopelessly Hereditary. This is one of the first stories that I published on this site. And it's about a 32 Ford 5-window coupe built by a guy named Paul Gilligan. And Paul Gilligan is the father of Steve Gilligan, who is a friend of mine and a member of the Estranged Car Club. And Steve, in his own right, has had just a countless amount of incredible traditional hot rods and custom cars. And long story short, he got it from his dad. And Paul Gilligan has built, I couldn't even wager a guess how many cars he's built, but he's the kind of guy that just has an eye for traditional hot rods and customs. He's a wildly talented guy, and he's put together just, I don't even know, hundreds of cars probably in his lifetime. And so this story is about a car that he built, and it's kind of also the tale of kind of the fact that sometimes we don't really have a choice in this hot rod stuff. We're just bit by the bug, and that's it. And that was certainly the case for Paul, and subsequently for his son Steve, and probably for Steve's son Carson. And so that's kind of the story is about this 32 Ford, but it's also in the grander scope, kind of the story of how sometimes this hot rod thing is an affliction and we don't have a choice. So anyway, I've rambled on long enough. I'm not doing another take. Hopelessly Hereditary. Ironandsteel.com is the website. The other thing is, go to this when you're on the site, scroll through, hit the subscribe button, punch in your email, and then you'll be up to date. I'll send you emails when there's new content, whether it's a new article or a new podcast. I'm doing one of each per week. And so if you punch in your email, hit subscribe, you'll stay up to date on all that. So anyway, all that bullshit aside, again, thank you so much for being here, and kick back, relax, and I'll read you this story. Some of us never had a chance. Whether we knew it or not, our fate was sealed the minute we were born. And can you imagine never even having a choice? Like, it's just decided for you. Like, there's no way around it. Resistance is futile. You're stuck. That's it. All she wrote. No debate. Alarming? Well, hang on. Let me give you some context. I'm not talking about some bizarre religious cult or being born into the mob. No, I'm talking about something far worse. Something from which there is absolutely no escape. A dirt that does not wash off, no matter how hard you scrub. You see, some of us are just plain old natural-born hot rodders. And Paul Gilligan of Vancouver, Washington is the perfect example of just what I mean. If you have any doubt about this fact, the 32 Ford Coupe in question here should be all the evidence you need to prove Paul's affliction. Now, before you go feeling sorry for him and wondering, is there anything I can do to help? Fear not. He came to terms with his fate some time ago. You see, Paul is a pretty sharp guy, and he figured out early on that the best thing to do with this problem was to simply accept it. And he not only embraces it, he happily and freely admits it. After all, the first step is simply admitting you have a problem, right? Now, the story may have been written from day one, but the earliest memory he can recall of actually realizing it was when he was about 6 years old. See, Paul was part of a large family, having 4 considerably older brothers who were, and this may shock you, major gearheads. On occasion, the older boys would allow him to tag along on their adventures, and one day in the early 1960s, they brought him along to look at a hot-rodded 1932 Ford 5-window coupe that was for sale locally. They arrived and one by one shuffled along the side of a house where they were greeted by a car-shaped lump covered by a tattered green army tarp. The gentleman pulled back the tarp to reveal a worn-out, dilapidated old coupe. It was more than a little rough around the edges and not exactly what Paul's brothers were looking for. And citing the fact that they were wanting something a little nicer, the boys began inching their way back to their own car. The man selling the coupe, however, insisted that they at least have a look under the hood. Humoring the guy, the boys agreed. When he opened the hood, it revealed an early small block Chevy with multiple carbs and Corvette valve covers. Now, as proud as he was, the boys were unimpressed and remained unswayed. They thanked him for his time and headed home. None of them gave it much thought beyond that. None, that is, except for Paul. Even though he was just a small boy at the time, he remembers the sight of that engine bay as if it were yesterday. He says, "That is when it all started. I remember that experience and seeing that motor stuffed in there like it were yesterday. And from then on, I was hooked." With the stage set, Paul embarked on his hot rod career. Through the years, he has had countless cars of all kinds, mostly early Fords. Early on, he developed a talent for body and paint work and eventually opened his own body shop. He spent his free time buying, selling, building, and showing hot rod Fords. It didn't take long for Paul to gain a reputation for having some of the most tasteful and skillfully built cars in the area. And along the way, he also became quite proficient at sniffing out old hot rods and large stashes of parts. It was one such stash of long hoarded away parts that would eventually lead to the creation of the gorgeous coupe you see in front of you here. Some years back, Paul had heard a rumor about a large collection of 32 Ford parts in a town on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. He made contact with the gentleman and eventually was able to talk his way into what was essentially a warehouse stuffed full of 32 Ford treasures. It was the proverbial honey hole that we all dream about right in front of him. There were bodies, frames, engines, body parts, and countless odds and ends. Now, this wasn't Paul's first rodeo, and where a lot of us may have gotten weak in the knees, he buckled down and set out to make a deal. He enlisted the help of his son Steve, and the two of them together would end up purchasing the entire lot as a package. With the deal made, Paul and Steve began the enormous job of clearing out the warehouse. The sheer volume of the collection made it a daunting task. But over the course of many, many long days and weeks, they hauled load after load of dusty relics from the four walls that had kept them hidden for so long. The idea was simple. Sort and categorize it, set aside what they wanted to keep for themselves, and sell off the rest. It seemed easy enough, but the amount of items the gentleman had amassed over the many years of collecting meant that this would be an almost full-time job for father and son. They quickly filled their shops and garages, and with no other choice, began renting storage units to house what remained. After several months of sorting, taking inventory, selling off duplicates and items neither of the two needed or wanted, they each walked away with their own stash of keepers. And among the items in Paul's pile was most of what was needed to build this killer coupe. He shifted some cars around in his shop to make room, and he got to work. Paul began by plucking a nice frame out of his newfound inventory and installed a Model A crossmember up front to assist the dropped axle with the task of getting the front end down where it belonged. He then fit a stock crossmember to the rear, altered the center portion of it to accept a 40 Ford spring and rear end. Then the same era juice brakes were used front and rear. Steering duty was given to an F1 box. A warmed-over flathead from a 53 Mercury was placed between the frame rails. It was completely rebuilt and featured an Isky cam, Offenhauser heads, and custom-made headers. The body itself also came from the aforementioned honey hole. It wore a heavy coat of gray primer and was in overall good condition. Paul put his years of body and paint experience to work and began the process of making the car laser straight. He then sprayed coat after coat of gorgeous poppy red, which is a period-perfect color that is, in reality, a little more orange than it is red. He had the interior stitched in white vinyl with orange piping. Dave's Upholstery in Vancouver, Washington handled this with precision and captured the era of the car perfectly. And to top it off, a tasteful dose of pinstriping added by Camo lettering, also from Vancouver, Washington. So, the moral of the story is this. We don't always have a choice. But that's not always a bad thing. And after a lifetime of hot rodding, Paul has figured out two things. First, there is no cure for antique car obsession. And second, it seems to be hereditary. Paul explains. My son has it just as bad as me. I don't know whose fault that is. Right. Okay, there you have it. Hopelessly Hereditary. IronandSteel.com, again, is the website. It is 100% worth your time to go there and check out, if nothing else, just to check out that article, just to see the car. Really is a stunning car, absolutely beautiful, timeless, period, hot rod that has just a wicked look to it, and it's a bitchin' car. So, great car, great photos. The photos are actually Trent Sherrill. I don't have to tell you, Trent's one of the best in the business. His photos are always impeccable. This is no exception. So great car, great photos, and worth your time. ironandsteel.com. Again, while you're there, not to beat this to death, but please hit the subscribe button, punch in your email. It takes 2 fucking seconds. And that way you'll be up to date when there's new content, which is often. So currently I'm doing an article a week and a podcast a week. And soon enough, there's going to be another announcement that you're going to want to know about. So ironandsteel.com, hit the subscribe button, blah, blah, blah. So I forgot to mention at the beginning, as I often forget to do, the Q&A. So I've been trying to incorporate a Q&A session at the end of every podcast. I do get some good questions periodically. I got a few good ones this week. I got one fucking stupid one. I'll start with the stupid one, and it's not even stupid. It just doesn't have anything to do with hot rods, but here we are. So the question is Portland as bad as they say it is? Yeah, bro, it's pretty bad. So I don't know what to tell you other than I used to own a business in downtown Portland, and I mean like downtown Portland, in like a very fucking expensive area to like be leasing and owning a business. That business, it would be out of business if I still owned it today. The windows would be smashed out and it would be on fire. It's almost uninhabitable down there. And it's pretty fucking terrible, and it's really sad. And anybody that tells you any different is a straight up fucking liar. And I used to say that Portland was terrible just to keep people from moving here. But now I'm just being straight up when I tell you that, yeah, it is not good. So if you're planning a trip here, do it at your own discretion and risk. Stay out of downtown. And even if you're not downtown, it's not great for quite a while outside the city. So yeah, is it as bad as they say it is? Sure fucking is, dude. So there you have it. The second question is, how long does it take you to write these stories? All right. So it depends on the story. If I'm just, if you're on this, like if you go to the website and you look, there's a whole bunch of different styles of stories. Some of them are, about people. Some are about cars, which are inevitably about people. So there's, articles about other people and other cars. There's some articles there that are about my personal experiences, building or buying cars, or just things that have happened to me. And then there's other articles that are just, almost just a straight up rant. And so it depends on what the content is. That dictates how long it takes to write it. If it's just a rant, I'm pretty fucking good at those. I can whip one of those out in 2 minutes and publish it. Since I'm so full of anger. And, so I can do those pretty quick. If it's a story about something that I've done or an experience that's happened, to me or a car that I've built, since I'm so familiar with it, I can, usually just whip something like that out in a couple of hours and edit it and have it pretty much ready to go. If it's a story about another person or someone else's car and their story or whatever, it takes a considerably longer amount of time, just because number one, it's a lot to learn. You have to learn all about this person or this car or both or whatever, and then it takes a lot to turn that into a story that's readable and that people enjoy. So, and you always want to do right by the person and do right by their story and their car. And so I don't know that it's pressure, but it's you definitely have to be a little bit more careful and thoughtful about it. So that just equates to time. So as an example, the story You Don't Know Jack by my friend Jack Corley, that probably took me 10 hours maybe collectively to write that story. but I wanted to make sure that it was a good story, for Jack, and because he was my friend, and you always want to do the right thing for whoever the story is about. So that takes time. The story I wrote for Hop Up a few years ago about Russ Meeks, I don't even know how long that thing was, but it had to have been 12,000 words. I mean, they told me take as much space as you need and do whatever you have to do to tell the story the way you want to tell it. And so they gave me total freedom, and it was like 9 pages or some crazy shit. But Russ Meeks had a really long and interesting life, so it took a long time to write his story. Some slapdick might be able to whip something up and get it in 600 words so that you can print it and move on, but that's not doing justice to the person. So the Russ Meeks story probably took me I have no clue, but 25-30 hours at least. Keep in mind this is happening over the course of weeks and months and all that, and you have to factor in the time that it takes to interview these people and take notes or record and then go back and listen or read through the notes, and it's just it takes a really long time. So anyway, not to get too far off base, but it depends on what I'm writing, and there's a huge range, but I would say the average for stuff that's on the website, I would say probably an average of say 3 hours or so total. So it takes a little bit of time, but it just depends on what you're writing about. So I get this question a lot. It usually comes through just as vague as it came through this time. It just says tips for young hot rodders is the question. So short answer, probably the most important thing I can say is find somebody who has been doing it for a long time that is willing to teach you, and shut up and listen to everything that they have to say. There are so many old dudes out there that have been doing this for 100 years, and we're losing them every day, and their stories are so important, and the knowledge that they have that's going to go with them when they die, that it's super important. And these guys are aching to tell you this stuff if somebody will just shut up and listen to them. So that's the first thing, most important thing. Try to find a mentor. For me early on, it was my buddy Robbie, still is. And he's not an old dude. So hey, Robbie, if you're listening to this, I didn't mean to imply that you're old, so relax. But no, find one of these guys that's been doing this for a long time. Listen to everything that they say, and try to absorb it and be respectful, and go about it that way. The other thing, coincidentally, I can tell you is read some of this content that's on my fucking website. ironandsteel.com has 30 something articles on it. All the content's free, and off the top of my head I can think of 3 articles right now that are catered toward young people trying to get into this hobby. So 2 hours a night is one article that basically outlines the best way to get over the hump when you're trying to put a car together. There's another one called Buying Made Easy that tells you the easiest way to put yourself at the front of the line when you're trying to buy a car, an old car that other people might be after, and how to successfully negotiate and buy an old car. So that was Buying Made Easy is the second one. And then the third one, I think it was the last podcast I just did too. It's called Get Some Patience Now. And there's so much info in those 3 articles alone that I've learned over the years. I was that young guy trying to figure this shit out for a long time, and it took me a long time to get it figured out. And so I write a lot about do's and don'ts and where the landmines are, and what to do and what not to. So find an old dude, listen to everything he says, read content on ironandsteel.com, and that's a good enough start. Also the Jalopy Journal, of course, the ham. So much fucking information on that website. It is incredible. So yeah, between those couple 2-3 things, that's a good enough start. So The last question, I get this question a lot. Will I ship international merchandise, I assume? Yeah, if you're willing to pay for it, absolutely. Keep in mind, it costs as much usually to ship a t-shirt to like Australia or whatever as the t-shirt actually costs. So, but yeah, if you live overseas, you're probably used to that game. So if you're willing to pay the actual shipping, of course I'll ship it to you. I don't give a shit. So those are all the questions for this week, by the way. But speaking of merch, and here's another great reason to hit the subscribe button, and then I'll quit on this subject. But in 2 weeks or sooner, if you're going to our drag race event, August 19th, 20th, and 21st, I believe. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be releasing some new merchandise that is so fucking out of this world, stupid, funny, offensive, terrible, amazing. It's the fucking weirdest shit ever. You're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. Either way, you're gonna hate it. But it's all I can say is that it's serial killer themed. It's a pun. It's amazing, and you're gonna want to know when it's available. And so that's another reason to subscribe. So ironandsteel.com, hit the subscribe button, and when that merch thing comes out, yeah, you're gonna shit, and in a good way somehow. I don't know if there's a good way to shit a brick or not, but anyway, I'm rambling. It's after midnight. This entire podcast has fought me the whole way. You don't give a shit about that, and I'm just rambling, and I'm going to stop doing that now. So I'm going to say goodbye for now, and thanks again for being here. I do genuinely mean that, and we'll talk to you again in 1 week. See you soon.